When it comes to the realms of tabletop miniatures games, Games Workshop has a number of different offerings for you. Depending on the kind of scale that you want, depending on the kind of setting that you want, they really have something pretty much for everybody. But for me, after almost 25 years worth of miniature wargaming, I like to keep my setting a little bit smaller, a little bit more compact, and look to the skirmish side of things. Games Workshop does have their futuristic Warhammer 40k offering Kill Team, but I'm a fantasy guy, so I like Age of Sigmar and that whole setting. But I don't want to paint the literally hundreds of miniatures. I don't want to go through the hours of building them, collecting them, painting them, all of the expense in buying them, and then spend 2 hours, 3 hours on a relatively normal size game of Age of Sigmar. So what game do I have for that? For me, that game is Warcry. It uses the same setting of Age of Sigmar, but on a much smaller scale. So today, we're going to be going through Warcry, and I'm going to show you everything that you need to know in order to start playing the game, where you get your rules from, what warbands you're going to want to pick, and where you can go and take your next steps from there. Warcry is Games Workshop's fast-paced skirmish-scale game set in their iconic setting of the Age of Sigmar mortal realms, where gods and monsters will do battle in order to further their own ends, and where life is a constant push or pull between the forces of good and the forces of darkness. Unlike some of the bigger games, let's say Age of Sigmar itself or Warhammer 40,000, Warcry is set on a much smaller scale. You'll be commanding warbands of between about 7 to 10 fighters, and you'll be going up against enemy warbands looking to take treasure, looking to capture objectives, or looking to take down your opponents so that you can win your games. Games of Warcry typically take anywhere between about 45 minutes and 1 hour and 20, which makes that timescale kind of ideal if you want to get a couple of games in during an evening of wargaming or have limited time. Maybe you want to do this kind of thing in an after-school club, or just want something to do for 1 hour or so on the weekend when you're free. I did mention that Warcry is a much smaller skirmish scale game, so it doesn't have any of the drawbacks of the large scale games in which your force is going to be far cheaper for you to collect. There are going to be less models for you to have to build and to have to paint. And overall, if, like me, you don't want to have hundreds of miniatures to have to think about while you're playing your games, this scale of Warcry is much more suitable for that. The rule set itself is extremely tight. It's very simple to learn. It's the kind of thing that you could learn if you're already familiar with miniature wargaming. You could learn it in, let's say, 30 minutes or so. There is a lot of tactical nuance to the game with regards to positioning and how you move your fighters. So we're seeing it a lot recently, where a lot more events and a lot more tournaments are being run with Warcry in a more match play setting. And personally, I feel that it lends itself to something like a one-day event where you can go have a bunch of games and have a good time. The Warcry community itself is amazing. As a smaller scale, kind of almost more light-hearted game, it doesn't attract the same kind of crowds that the larger, more mainstream games seem to these days. The most common questions that people ask is, how do I start Warcry? How do I get into the game? And realistically, there are several routes depending on where you are in the Games Workshop hobby. If you're already playing Games Workshop's other fantasy game, Age of Sigmar, you'll already have everything that you need in terms of the miniatures and the models to jump right in and start playing the game. Alternatively, there is Warhammer Underworlds. If you're an existing Warhammer Underworlds player, you can use the majority of your warbands already in Warcry. They all have rules, so that's something that you can jump into straight away. But finally, maybe you are going in from a completely fresh perspective and you're going to be jumping into Warcry without any further knowledge of Games Workshop, how the hobby works, and what you're going to need, in which case you'll be brand new and you'll be going in mainly, most likely, through one of the existing Warcry warband box sets. So for example, here we've got the Horns of Hashut and we have the Rotmire Creed. There are several other warbands that we're going to go through, but yeah, that will most generally be the most common way for people to get into the game. Other common routes include one of the Warcry big boxes. In this case, we have Nightmare Quest. It comes with everything that you need in terms of the miniatures, the terrain, and 2 existing warbands for you to jump in, maybe with a friend, and start to play. Alternatively, there is the Crypt of Blood starter set, which is designed for a much smaller style game. It will give you effectively 2 self-contained half-size warbands for you to dip your toe in and see if it's a game that you like or not. Finally, Games Workshop have been starting to do the doubles boxes, where it will have 2 warbands packaged together along with 1 piece of terrain, and if you like the look of either of them, you can maybe go in halves with a friend, pick up those models, and start playing that way. So luckily for us, Games Workshop has done some pretty good things with Warcry in terms of the rules and how to get them. If you go over to warhammercommunity.com, you'll be able to download all of the core rules there. You can get the core rulebook with a number of match play missions that will allow you to jump straight in. If you're coming along from Age of Sigmar, you can also check out the download section of Warhammer Community, and you'll be able to find a compendium with all of the current legal miniatures that you can use. Now, if you are not going to be using compendium teams, or if you're going to be using one of the newer bespoke warbands, I very much urge people to check out Warcry. You can go there, you can do list building, there are rules for every single legal faction in the game and every single legal fighter, there are rules for all of the different missions in the game, there are rules for all of the different twists, all the terrain, everything that you want is over on Warcry, so I would definitely recommend people to go and check that out. I will put the links down in the description below for you guys to take a look. As a tabletop miniatures game, Warcry requires a number of different things for you to actually be able to play the game. If we take a look here to see what we got in the Heart of Gur starter set, you'll see that we'll need miniatures for both players for their warbands. You'll need a number of different tokens to show the different status effects and show if your miniatures have been wounded, how they're moving, that kind of thing. You'll need a tape measure, you'll need a set of dice. Of course, you'll need a board to play on, along with the terrain on that board to give you a great setting for your games, a copy of the core rules, and then on top of that, each warband comes with a number of different warband cards, which are more like reference points so that you can see the stats of your different fighters, what they can do on the battlefield, and how they're going to be operating. Talking about terrain, there are a number of different options for you to pick. One option might be the Scales of Talaxis box set. It comes with all of the terrain that you will need in order to play your game, along with mission cards and twist cards and terrain setout cards for you to be able to use when you're generating games outside of the match play format. It also does come with a set of tokens, so if you were to pick up maybe one of the Warband boxes and Scales of Talaxis, along with the free rules that you can download from Warhammer Community, you'll have everything that you need in order to play. Alternatively, other terrain sets do work with Warcry. Generally, what you will want is a fair bit of verticality in your games, so you can climb up onto things and jump over things and jump off of ledges, but otherwise what you're going to be looking for is a good mix of tall terrain pieces, low terrain pieces, and pieces of scattered terrain to really add to that cinematic feel to your games. Between all of the Age of Sigmar factions, all of the Bladeborn warbands from Warhammer Underworlds, and all of the existing bespoke warbands that you have for Warcry itself, there are over 45 factions that you can choose from when you're looking to play your first warband. But really, people come and people ask, okay, which one of these factions should I be picking? What should I be playing? And the answer that I give to that is always pretty much the same. Different kinds of players will have different considerations when they go to pick their force. For example, they might be looking at how competitively viable they are, if they are particularly interested in going to tournaments, or they might be looking at the background of those miniatures to see the flavor of them and how they feel, or alternatively, they might be looking at the play style, how they tend to play on the battlefield, if that's the kind of thing that chimes with them from other games. First and foremost, the Games Workshop hobby is a miniatures collecting game where you're going to be collecting your miniatures, you're going to be building them, you're going to be painting them, and then eventually you're going to be playing with them. The advice that I will give is that pick whichever warband you feel that you really like the models of, It's not like we're playing one of the larger Games Workshop games where, of course, you're going to have to be painting tens or hundreds of miniatures, but still, generally speaking, the miniatures that you like and the miniatures that you enjoy on the board will, for the most part, be a very good place to start when you are going through your initial steps. I mentioned that Warcry itself has a number of bespoke warbands. We're currently in the second edition of the game. There are a number of warbands that were released for the first edition. They now have rules for the second edition, but over the last year and a half, we've seen that Games Workshop has released a number of different warbands that you can jump into. These are the ones that will generally be readily available on Games Workshop's website if you wanted to buy them, and also easiest available through third parties. So what we're going to do, we're going to go through each of those warbands, we're going to give a little bit of flavor on them, and I'll give a small amount of insight as to how they play on the board, and then you guys can make up your decision as to which one you want to start with. The Horns of Hashut are the human followers of the dark artifice god of the Chaos Dwarves. What sets them apart from other warbands is really their power through their various abilities to make opponents weaker through use of their smoke bombs, and to punch above their weight and be able to take on far more numerous foes with their flame hurlers. That being said, it doesn't mean that they are a small warband. They have access to shatterers, which are some of the better infantry in the game that you can buy for their points cost. The Rotmire Creed, originally doctors and healers who went into the swamps in order to try and find different kind of cures and remedies for sicknesses, were eventually corrupted by the chaos god Nurgle, and now they serve his ends trying to spread plague and disease across the world. On the battlefield, they take advantage of this by using ranged blowpipe abilities in order to do damage before their fighters run into combat. They also have some extremely competent fighters, in this case with the leader, the Witherlord, who has a lethal injection that he can put into opponents, even have the possibility of killing them outright, along with bloated ones who are generally good all-round fighters that can really put a dent, even things up to enemy leaders, given how much damage they can do with their razor claws and their nets. The Jade Obelisk are followers of the enigmatic deity, the Speaker in the Stone. It has blessed them with extreme resilience and longevity, but also cursed them at the same time to be turning into jade idols. This curse can be offset by them going into the world and smashing down any idols and monuments of opposing gods. On the battlefield, they play very much like a faction of glass cannons, with even their lowliest desecrators and despoilers being able to do extreme damage to the enemy. However, being partly made of stone themselves, they are one of the slower warbands in the game, so it's a fine balance between getting to your opponent or bringing your opponent to you and using that damage in order to take them down. The Hunters of Huanchi are a special spawning of chameleon skinks who have been sent out into the world in order to protect the now downed Eye of Chotek. They excel in hit and run tactics, fight and fade, very good on objective-based missions where they can use their superior speed and mobility to get places, and when your opponent comes to engage with them, you can run away and you can dance around the board. The Claws of Karanak are followers of the blood god Khorne's flesh hounds. They try to emulate those pack tactics used by those hounds by running in there, activating their fighters one after the other, trying to give your opponent no time to be able to react to what it is that you're doing to them, and bringing down key targets, generally by force of numbers, and the damage done by their medium and heavier fighters. Askagan Trueblades are a sect of warrior vampire monks who try to use discipline and training in order to resist their vampiric urges. On the battlefield, they'll play very much like Jade Obelisk, with each one of their fighters trading in a small number of attacks for relatively high damage every time they hit. They are much faster than the Jade Obelisk, all being vampires, and they have a suite of abilities ranging from enemy debuffs to damage buffs on your side. The Questa Soulsworn, heroes all sent out by Sigmar into the world to try and act upon prophecies and omens that the God King himself has foretold. Being Stormcast, they are one of the smaller warbands in the game, but also being Stormcast, they benefit from the very good offensive and defensive stats that title brings. They do have a number of abilities to offset the fact that they are a smaller warband and try and bring them up to the level of more numerous warbands. They can use abilities to get extra moves across the battlefield. They can get extra abilities to get extra attacks. And all of this works together to make a fairly compact warband that is generally pretty forgiving to play depending on the missions that you are playing. The Royal Beast Flayers are a warband of deranged cannibals and ghouls who have been sent out into the world, led by a vampire with delusions that he is some kind of noble lord going out on his hunting expedition. The way the Royal Beast Flayers play in Warcry, they use the numerical advantage offered by their basic ghouls, along with a number of support pieces in order to make those ghouls move across the battlefield more quickly and be able to overwhelm the foe with strength of numbers. Going from cannibalistic ghouls to cannibalistic ogres, the Gorge and Moorpack are currently roaming the world in search of a way to satiate the curse that has been given to them by their gulping god. They are cursed to always feel hunger, and only by sacrifice and feeding the great moor pits that have turned up in the Nullwood can they temporarily satiate this. The Gorges themselves, if you ever wanted to play a warband of monsters whose only real job is to run across the battlefield and take down fighters, these guys are the ones for you. Being ogres themselves, they have a high number of good attacks and a lot of wounds to soak up enemy damage, but on the flip side, they aren't very tough. So any wounds that those enemies do to you are going to stick. And who has Sigmar sent out to take on these Gorges? They are the Wilder Corp Hunters. These guys are rangers and trackers extraordinaire. They very much play like the Hunters of Huanchi with their bait and fade tactics. However, unlike the Hunters of Huanchi, what they do have going for them are their crossbow bolts. Crossbow bolts are far more damaging than blowpipes, so the Wilder Corp Hunters can use them to effectively do damage to their opponents. They're a bit slower than Hunters of Huanchi, but they counter that by being able to use their hunting hounds to support their main fighters, put some extra damage in, and lock down enemy fighters with their bite attacks. Vulcan Flameseekers are master beast tamers who worship the Earth Salamander Volcatrix. On the board, don't let these stunty dwarves fool you. They're far faster than you think, with a number of different abilities that will give them bonus moves to get them across the battlefield very quickly, and other abilities that turn even their misses in combat into devastating critical hits that can really pile the damage onto your opponent, making them one of the most consistent warbands in terms of melee damage. On the other side, we have the Cruel Boys Monster Killers. They've been going out into the Nullwood to prove their mettle and to kill anything that stands in their way to add to their grisly trophies. In-game, the Monster Killers use ambush tactics and all sorts of different abilities to really pile on the pressure and add several force multipliers that makes them do a lot more damage than their normal stat line would otherwise allow. Supported by their leader, the Beast Knob, and their inherent reaction to be able to do either damage or to stop people from moving when they come close to you, the Cruel Boys exemplify the playstyle of having sneaky traps and making it so that your opponent doesn't really know where the damage is going to be coming from, or if they'll even be able to get into combat in the first place. Moving onwards, there are a number of different ways for you to expand out your collection once you've had a couple of games with your base warbands, either from Age of Sigmar, from Warhammer Underworlds, or the warband boxes themselves. No doubt you will want to do some list building for your own, check out what's been doing well for other people, and generally buy in a little deeper into the Games Workshop hobby. One of the best ways of looking is to check out the different ranges that Games Workshop has to offer, look at the different fighters, and if it is into the Age of Sigmar and those warbands that you want to step into, take a look at the bundles that Games Workshop do. They do Battle Force boxes, they do Vanguard boxes, they do other starter sets. Most of the time, if it's in Age of Sigmar, it'll have Warcry rules, and you can go check them out.